If you're happy and you know, say hello.
Hello.
If you're happy and you know, say hello.
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 Well, I'm happy and I want to say hello, everyone, and welcome back to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. This is my lovely assistant, Rosa, and today is our second week of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And so with our food of the week of dates, we are making cookies. Do you like cookies?
Yeah.
Excellent. So do I. So the cookies we're making today are called mamoul, and they are a traditional date-filled cookie. When I searched for Middle Eastern recipes with dates, there were many, many recipes and many, many variations. So I looked at a few and tried to get a sense of it, and we're gonna make some today. So this is a bit of an involved process. They have an outer pastry, and then in the date inner filling, and a spice mix that goes in that. So there's going to be a few components, but my understanding is the actual making of these cookies is not terribly difficult. I hope that's true because I didn't do a dry run this week. You're seeing it for the very first time. We're going to start with making the cookie, the pastry. This recipe is from a blog called An Edible Mosaic. Because I'm just testing, we're only halving the recipe today. So I called for 3/4 of a cup of water. I've made that 3/8 of a cup of water, and which is about 88 mils. So I've got about 88 mils in here. And so this recipe calls for yeast. I'm not really sure why. She's not really sure why, but it seems to be important. All the mamoul recipes had it. So we're gonna put our yeast into our warm water, and the recipe calls for a half a cup of sugar. I'm just gonna put a little bit in with the water to help activate the yeast and set that off to the side for a minute. We're ready to make our dough. Now I used instant yeast, so you probably don't have to proof it like this when you use instant yeast, but it never hurts in my opinion. Traditional mamoul uses semolina flour. I found several recipes that just use all-purpose flour, some that use a mix of half and half. I didn't find semolina flour at the grocery store. And I want these videos to be accessible, things that you can find. Okay, in it goes. Thank you, Rosa. Things that you can find at the grocery store so you can make them along with us. So I chose recipes that that used all-purpose flour, since I figured that's what you're most likely to have at home. So that's 2 cups of all-purpose flour, half a cup minus what we used for proofing of sugar. Okay, now we need a spoon. But not the spoon that was in your mouth and is now on the floor. Let's get a new spoon. Okay, can you mix that together? We've got our flour and our sugar all mixed in here together. Now we're gonna mix in our yeast mixture. Do you wanna pour it?
Yeah. Is that yeast?
Yeah, yeast and water. Now some recipes I saw called for milk. We aren't drinking much milk here in this household, so we're doing one that calls for water. But it doesn't really matter. I won't be able to eat these cookies anyway because they call for butter. Now, the recipes, I saw some used traditional, like what is traditional for us, regular bricks of butter. Others called for clarified butter, which is you can either make from regular butter, or you can buy already made at the grocery store called ghee. For the sake of authenticity and this recipe, I went ahead and bought the ghee. I've never used ghee before. The recipe called for 3/4 of a cup, so I halved that to 3/8. It also asks you to mix in some vegetable oil. So I did that already. It was melted to be liquid and then cooled back down to room temperature. So we're gonna mix that in slowly. And eventually we're going to want to knead it with our hands. We're mixing in the oil with the flour. You want to get it until it's just combined. Like other pastries, if you were making pie, you don't want to overmix it. My understanding is that it should end up being sandy and crumbly. So if you need to add a little bit more flour, up to a couple of tablespoons, then that is okay. So I think that maybe is what we're gonna do. But eventually you do still want your dough to have an oily sheen and a bit of an oily texture to it, which I definitely feel on my fingers right now. We're gonna put it in the freezer to stiffen. We're only gonna put it in for a few minutes, 5 to 10, for the sake of expediency. That's what the recipe we're following says. Other recipes I saw said to chill for longer. I saw one video that said that it really needs to absorb the ghee and doing it overnight is preferable. What do you think of that?
Good.
Okay, we're not going to eat any more, okay? Is it yummy?
Mm-hmm.
Great, I'd love to try it, but I can't. So I think we have our dough. Once we take it out of the freezer, we'll knead it a little more and get it ready to be shaped. In the meantime, we will be mixing up our spices and making our date filling. While our dough is setting in the freezer, we are going to make our filling. So the first thing you need to do is take your dates. Recipes I saw recommended medjool dates. I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about different date varieties. So these are the ones that I bought because they were on sale this week. Previously, I've purchased these ones that are Parnouche dates. Those ones were a bit dehydrated and already pitted. But the ones I bought this time, I needed to take the pits out of them. So that's a really important first step. Nobody wants to crunch down on a hard date pit. So even if you've used pitted dates, you definitely want to make sure when you go through them, there are no pieces of pit that you're crunching down on. Alternatively, I understand that if you go to like a Middle Eastern grocery store, you can buy date paste, which like comes in like a vacuum sealed pack, which would definitely save a fair amount of work in this recipe. So once you have pitted your dates, then you can chop them up as fine as you can. They're quite sticky. I found it difficult to chop them really fine because they just stuck to my knife and stuck to each other. Our first recipe that we've been using recommends doing this in a food processor. If you have a good food processor, then great. So I'm not really excited to make this sticky paste in my Vitamix. And I don't really have an alternative good food processor. So I've been kind of back and forth between this primary recipe and a second recipe from a blog called curiouscuisinaire.com. And I'll make sure that I link to both of them since I did use both recipes in creating, I guess, what will be my version of Maomu cookies. So this suggests, especially if you have a more dehydrated date, a saucepan method to make your paste. So I'm just going to go ahead and add about a tablespoon of oil. Here's where we also want to add our seasoning. So seasoning the date mixture is a big part of making your own recipe for Maomu cookies. Our filling is made with dates, of course, because that is our food of the week. But Maomu cookies can be made. There are other versions that are made with walnuts and pistachios. I did find also some versions that use a combination of the fillings. The spice mix we're using is a variation on the one from an edible mosaic, which she refers to as a cake spice mix. And so that has a lot of different spices in it. So I'll read them off for you. I made the full amount that she recommended, even though I'm halving the recipe, because some of them were as little as a 1/4 teaspoon, and I don't have an 1/8 of a teaspoon to measure less. And she says you can keep it in a sealed dry container for if you were to make something else. And who knows, I might just fall in love with these cookies so much, I'll want to make them again, and then I'll have the spice mix ready. 1/2 tablespoon of ground cinnamon, 1 1/4 teaspoons of allspice, 1/2 teaspoon of ground malab. So this is like a ground cherry pit. It is something you can find at a Middle Eastern supermarket, but is very difficult to find in a regular grocery store. So an alternative that you can use is a couple of drops of almond extract, and then maybe like a pinch of ground anise, which is in this recipe as well anyway. So I just used almond extract in mine. 1/2 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground ginger, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground anise, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground fennel seed, and a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves. Good news, guys, I found ground cloves. They had them this week at the grocery store. They didn't have them last week when I needed them then, but I have them now. I don't have fennel seed or ground anise. That's the one I couldn't find this week. Hopefully this mixture that I have will be great. 3/4 of a teaspoon in with my dates. 1, 2, 3. Now, if you used dried dates, then you probably also want to add some water to rehydrate them, reconstitute them a little bit. Here's a spoon. And so I'm just going to mix this around a little bit. The recipe says to let it cook for 7 to 10 minutes on your stove until you have a jam-like consistency. This definitely will not end up being quite as smooth as if I had made it out of the paste or out of a food processor, but hopefully it'll be enough to get the job done. I'm back. I've been stirring and working on my date mixture. I would say it is not what I would consider a jam consistency. You can have a look for yourself. It's a little bit more like a paste consistency, which I guess is what I want because I want a workable, moldable paste. So you can have a look at it there now that it's come out. And now we get to make the magic happen and put the parts together and make these spectacular Mamoul cookies. And now, my friends, it is time to put it all together. So we have our dough that was resting either on the counter, the fridge, the freezer, and we're gonna knead it back in a little bit, okay? And our date filling and the cookie sheet, it recommended a lined cookie sheet. I typically don't make cookies on a lined cookie sheet. I find there's usually enough butter in them, they come off on just fine, but I will follow the instructions. And so one other piece of equipment that you might want to have is a Mamoul mold. Now, I don't have that, but you can get them at a Middle Eastern grocery store, or you can order them online. And to be honest, I think this is part of what makes these cookies really beautiful and unique. They're wooden, and they have ornate designs and a wooden handle, and they're used to help mold, obviously, the cookies. So what we need to do is take a tablespoon of the dough. It says a scant tablespoon, so you don't like pack it in really tight. Just kind of scoop up a tablespoon, and then roll it into a ball in your hand. So you want a nice round ball. So if you're like me and you don't have a Mamoul mold, then the way we're going to do it is once you have your round ball, and then you press it into your hand to flatten it and make an indentation. So you can see what I'm doing with my hand here. And then you're going to get a teaspoon of your date mixture. So same idea, it says a scant teaspoon. So just kind of, although my stuff is pretty dense, it'd be hard not to have a packed teaspoon there. And then roll that into a ball as well. So a tablespoon of dough to a teaspoon of date mixture, then you're gonna take your date mixture, place it inside your dough, and then pinch it to close it back up again. Now I have date filling inside my cookie. So look, you can see my dates sticking out the bottom there. I'll try again on the next one and see if it turns out a little better. And then because they typically are decorated in the mold, you can use a fork as a way of decorating to just like put some crisscross marks on that. It reminds me of the way my mom used to make peanut butter cookies, or I guess not used to, she still does make them this way with the little fork marks on them. Or if maybe you have a cookie press for decorating other kinds of cookies, then that would be a neat way to decorate them as well. Meanwhile, my oven is preheating to 350 as is standard for cookies. These cookies are served by both Christians and Muslims. They are often used to celebrate Eid at the end of Ramadan, and also served by Christians at Easter, which is coming up for us. So I feel a little bit guilty making them during Lent, but here we are. And or also at Christmas. So those holy holidays and special occasions, perhaps like a baptism or a confirmation, those types of celebrations are often when these cookies are made. I'm working away here making and forming my cookies. It's kind of meditative. It's a bit of a spiritual practice, I think, if you were to be really intentional about it. A good Lenten practice to roll out these cookies. And so as I do it, I'm thinking about the story this week. So the story this week is a story of inclusion about Zacchaeus, who is the tax collector in Jericho. And much to his surprise, Jesus invites himself over for dinner. In our day and age, that might be considered rude if I just invited myself over to your house for dinner. I mean, especially during COVID. But in Jesus' day, it was different. Hospitality was a great honor, a big gift. To have someone as esteemed as Jesus at your house was very much a privilege. That was really exciting for Zacchaeus. And it totally changed his life. After meeting with Jesus, decided he wanted to live his life Jesus' way. He decided to give back a huge percentage of the wealth he had accumulated from cheating people as a tax collector. And anyone he had wronged, he paid them back 4 times as much. So that's pretty amazing. And I think that the reason Jesus' message got through is because Jesus chose to love Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus hadn't experienced a lot of love in his life. Being a tax collector was not highly looked upon in Jewish society. Seen as corrupt, seen as a sellout. Jesus didn't hurl insults. Jesus didn't half accept him. Say, I love you, but not your sin. He just said, I want to have dinner with you. I want to be with you. You're worth it to me. You're a worthy person. And that radical love and inclusion made a huge difference. I know when people love and accept me for who I am, I certainly respond better than to a lecture. We try to be about inclusion here, and that's one of the ways that we show God's love. And I think that's a really cool thing about this series, about Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, is that we are learning not just about Christian culture and learning stories of Jesus, but we're also learning about food from other cultures and other faith traditions. And so I think it fits perfectly with our story of Zacchaeus. I'm going to keep making my cookies, and I will show you what they look like when they're all done. I'll see you back here then. Our first batch of Mao cookies are out of the oven, and they turned out, I hope, really well. I think I made them a little bigger than you're supposed to, but I don't have a mold to guide me, so that's just how they'll be. We're gonna decorate them with the icing sugar. So good news, clarified butter means essentially just the fat in butter. People who have a dairy intolerance, it's often lactose, or in the case, which is likely the case with Ember and other babies, the casein, the milk protein. But there's no milk protein left in ghee, it's just the fat. So I'm gonna be able to I need a cookie. I'm really excited. Ooh, this looks really pretty, the powdered sugar over top. It's gonna make a real mess on my counter, but it's worth it. We're decorating these cookies and then we're gonna taste them. That's so exciting. Okay, our cookies are decorated with the icing sugar. They look really pretty. And I think I made my dough a little too dry. It's a little cracky on the top and wasn't perfectly smooth like in the beautiful pictures that I saw online. But the good news is the powdered sugar hides it really nicely. So I'll bring one up nice and close for you there. I previously thought that I wasn't gonna be able to eat these, and now I found out I can. So I'm really excited. So I'm gonna taste test it live. Here's hoping my facial reaction's good. That's really yummy. It's shortbread like on the outside, and I didn't really quite get to the date mixture on the inside. So there it is. Well, I hope you're as excited about your Mamamoo cookies as I am. And I think maybe I'll make another third batch of these to celebrate Easter. Okay, thanks for joining, and we'll see you next week on Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.